Hey everyone, ladies and gentlemen, coffee time. Good stuff, sir. Thank you. Okay, let's talk about Martin Luther. Okay, and we all know famously that he stuck a letter on the door in protest of Rome. And what people really don't understand, the main body of that letter was the withholding of the cup from the laity. In other words, this was about the bread and wine. Truly. Okay? And their tyranny of not giving the laity the blood with the body. Now, most people don't understand the significance of that. The body and blood is given. Okay? And Jesus, Yeshua said, take this bread and wine, do this in my sacrifice, in my remembrance. In other words, do this. That's a command, okay? Whether you like it or not, it's a command. Now, the interesting facts of this is several, okay? One of the things I'd like you to know is that the Protestant Church, after Henry VIII, they said that the king was now the supreme ruler of the church, and this act was official in 1534, I believe, somewhere. Yes, Supremacy Act, and but the King of England had already broken away from the Catholic Church, from the extension of Henry VIII. Now, Martin Luther's famous thing happened around 1517, okay? And he met with a gentleman, which it's called the Marburg Conquest. Luther and this gentleman named Huldrych Zwingli. He was from Sweden. And they were going to reconcile the views, and they agreed that the Catholic Mass was an invention. Okay, but they also spoke of the bread and wine. And this is where we get that the bread and wine is only symbolic. This Huldrych stated that it was only symbolic. Martin Luther disagreed. But they believe this is where modern Christianity gets the term church as opposed to mass from the Catholics. Okay, this is a fundamental difference, and it was about the cup, because that's what the letter stated, the cup. They denied the laity the blood. And one of the things that most people don't know, the Church of England, or the Protestant Church, did not officially take this stance, okay? In 1563, they did not believe in the transubstantiation of the Eucharist turning into the body and blood of Jesus, okay? But they continued to serve the bread and wine for over 100 years after that. Strange, I say, strange. Actually, it was quite longer in some churches. In fact, there's historical documents stating that it was into the mid 1800s. That is when they officially, truly stopped serving the bread and wine during the Mass. And Martin Luther continued with that practice because he broke away from the Protestant church and created his own church, the Lutheran Church. So as you see, there's a lot of misinformation and information that is not out there. Okay. So now if the defender of the faith, the King of England, he declared, that he was the supreme ruler prior to the official legal act in 1534 of the Supremacy Act, is what it was called, Act of Supremacy. In other words, this king on earth was now king of the, quote, true church. You see the difference there? This is why a lot of people with true church, true believers, this is where you really got to watch adopting that sentiment. Okay, now, because what happened is they made it legal. They made it a legal. It is no longer a spiritual connection, but a legal one on earth. It's very important. Now, even in from the early 1500s and the act of transubstantiation, in other words, it was legal. They didn't agree with it being the body and blood of Jesus. They didn't agree with it. This was their official stance. The protector of the faith, King of England. But they did not stop serving it for well over 100 years later. In fact, as I said, into the 1800s. So even the, quote, true church, or, the true Bible and sanitized Bible, they couldn't make a determination for hundreds of years. Even though they made it legal, they didn't enforce it. But see, it was a legal binding. It was no longer spiritual. Understand that. They took the spirit away and made the church a legal entity. It's very important, especially when it comes to when you see about the Pharisees and the Sadducees. You have to understand they perverted the law and made it physical with punishment. And no different than the Catholic Church, the Pharisees had, quote, penance. In other words, you had to pay for these sins. And while penance is something that a lot of the modern Christianity doesn't agree with, I understand their position. But penance is really a reminder in the Catholic form of praying. While they may say, oh, do this, do that, say these prayers, and most of modern Christianity calls that works. And Luther called it indulgences, paying for indulgences. What it was basically to go back to your faith and pray. Instead of doing these sins, pray. Was it abused? Absolutely. Absolutely, it was abused. Now, a lot of you know I lean towards the early church. And when I say early church, I mean the early church. This from Jesus' time forward for roughly 1,200 years, okay? But anyway, that's a lot of people don't understand that aspect of it. And works is something that is not understood. And I've mentioned before, it's how you are transformed. Now, here's another interesting tidbit. Most of out of the Reformation, they got rid of, even though Luther fought to have the bread and wine, in other words, the wine, the blood of Christ. Many other churches said, oh, no alcohol, bad. This is bad. We shouldn't be putting this bad stuff in our body. So they already declared the wine bad and the body and blood bad. Okay, so a Dr. Weck, his name is actually Welch, I should say, is a little bit longer than that. But he came up with a way of pasteurizing grape juice so that it would not ferment and become wine. And many of the churches in the 1800s, he sold this to a lot of baptismal churches, Baptist churches. And this became the new wine or blood. So when you see Welch grape juice, that's where that came from. To still have the blood transubstantiated, but without the alcohol. So a little bit of history there so you can understand it. Again, I'm just here to make you think. But a lot of people don't understand that aspect. And the single most symbolic nature that came where that the bread and wine was purely symbolic was from Huldrych Zwingli. Zwingli. Huldrych is spelled Huldrych. So even this aspect of it only being symbolic first came about roughly 400 years ago, because it was roughly in 1529. He brought this up in supposedly the late 1400s, and no one listened to him. But yeah, you're a whack job. But when Luther made his dominant post and put that letter on the church door, the whole argument was the tyranny of Rome and them not giving the cup. And that's how it's stated, the cup, meaning the wine, the blood of Christ, to the laity. He fought for the blood and the wine and the bread. He fought for it. He did not agree with Huldrych at all. So anyway, and then 1563, about 29 years later, roughly, the Protestant Church, or the Church of England, decided, we kind of like Huldrych's idea that it is symbolism, but they didn't enforce it. And so for another 200 years or so, roughly 100 plus years, it's almost 200, they continued with the bread and wine. So this whole idea of, it's only symbolic, while it may only be, it's 400 years old, truly it is actually closer to 200 years old. And many of your modern day Protestants, in other words, if you follow a 66-book Bible, you are a Protestant, whether you like it or not, because that is the whole reason, that is the difference, the whole reason between the Catholics and Orthodox and modern Christianity. If you follow a 66-book Bible, I don't care what denomination you are a Protestant Methodist, you are a Protestant whatever, you are a Protestant New Reformed whatever, you are a Protestant non-denominational, you are Protestant. Food for thought.